My father kicked me out over something ridiculous. Spilling sauce on his precious NASCAR cap. I always knew my parents had a favorite, and it wasn't me. Growing up, my little sister got everything she ever wanted. If she so much as blinked in the direction of a new iPhone or designer purse, my parents would trip over themselves to get it for her. Meanwhile, I was out there hustling, picking up every part-time job I could just afford my own gas and clothes. I wasn't stupid. I knew where I stood in the family hierarchy. I just figured if I kept my head down and worked hard, one day I'd have something that was mine, something no one could take away. I had a plan. I wasn't just working random jobs for the hell of it. I was saving up. Maybe it wasn't much yet, but it was growing. I kept my stash hidden away in different spots around my room, just in case. I didn't trust anyone in that house, least of all my sister. Turns out, I was right not to. One day, I came home from a long shift at the gas station, sweaty, exhausted, and dreaming about the ice-cold soda waiting for me in the fridge. But when I stepped into my room, something felt off. My stomach dropped. I went straight to one of my hiding spots, an old shoebox buried in the back of my closet. Empty. My heart pounded as I checked the others. Every single stash gone. I stormed downstairs, and there she was, sitting at the kitchen counter like nothing happened, scrolling on her phone. And right next to her, a neat little stack of my cash. She must have heard me coming because she didn't even look up, just smirked like she'd been expecting me. She didn't even try to deny it, just shrugged and said something about how the money was basically payment for me living in the house. As if I hadn't been buying my own food half the time. As if I hadn't been paying for my own clothes since I was 15. The audacity nearly made my head explode. I reached for the money, but she yanked away, laughing like it was some kind of joke. And that's when it happened. In the middle of this stupid back and forth, my elbow hit something, and suddenly, a full jar of ketchup went flying to the air in slow motion. It flipped, then splattered across something sitting on the chair next to my sister. My dad's prized NASCAR cap. The one he treated like some kind of holy relic. The one he'd never even let me touch, let alone wear. We both stared at it, horror dawning on my sister's face. She might have stolen my money, but she knew exactly what this meant. Then, like clockwork, she pulled out her best move, the tears. Instantly, she was sobbing, holding up the ketchup cover hat like I had just committed some unforgivable sin. Right on cue, my parents came running. My dad's face turned redder than the ketchup. My mom gasped like she'd just seen a disaster. And my sister? Oh, she played it beautifully, sobbing about how I'd been harassing her, how she had just been sitting there minding her own business when I went into one of my angry moods. And through the jar, I tried to explain. I really did. But my dad wasn't listening. My mom wasn't listening. The only sound in the room was my sister Fate crying like she was up for an Oscar. And then the words that changed everything. Get out. For a second, I thought I misheard. My dad's voice was like a hammer to my chest. I looked at my mom, expecting her to say something to defend me. Nothing. Just crossed arms and a look that said she wasn't going to argue. I turned to my sister. She smiled just a little, just enough to let me know she had won. So that was it. No discussion, no second chances. I was out. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, whatever I could shove in my backpack, and I walked out that door. No clue where I was going. No plan. Just one thought running through my head. I was never coming back. The motel smelled like stale cigarettes and bad decisions. The kind of place where people checked in but didn't want to be seen checking out. It wasn't much, but it was cheap, and right now, cheap was all I could afford. I paid for a week up front and got a room that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 90s. The wallpaper was peeling. The carpet was stained with things I didn't want to think about, and the bed creaked if I so much as breathed too hard. But it had 4 walls and a door that locked, so I took what I could get. I found a job bussing tables at a diner down the road. The pay was garbage, and the hours were worse, but at least I had something. Some nights I got lucky. Leftover fries, a half-eaten burger, some kid to a tantrum over. Other nights, I went to bed hungry. Real hunger. The kind that made my stomach cramp and had me lying awake, counting down the hours until my next shift. I'd never been rich, but I'd never gone hungry before. Turns out there's a big difference between the two. One night, after a long shift, I was walking back to the motel when I saw him. An old man sitting on a bench, staring down at a spilled carton of milk. The plastic container lay on its side, a slow trickle running off the edge of the bench onto the pavement. He didn't move, didn't even blink, just sat there watching it, like he was mourning a loss. And maybe he was. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together. That was his dinner, or at least part of it. I hesitated. I didn't have much to spare, but I knew what it felt like to be hungry, knew what it was like to wonder where your next meal was coming from. So I turned around, walked into the nearest gas station, and bought what I could, a loaf of bread, a can of beans, and another carton of milk. It wasn't much, but it was something. When I walked back and handed it to him, he just stared at me, like I just offered him the keys to a mansion. He asked why I was helping him. I told him I didn't really know. Maybe because I knew how it felt. Maybe because I didn't want to be the kind of person who looked the other way. He took the bag, nodded, and introduced himself. Robert. Just Robert. I sat down next to him. The way he spoke caught me off guard. Clear, precise, not like most of the people I'd met living on the streets. There was something about the way he carried himself that made me curious. I asked him how he ended up here. He sighed, like he'd told the story 100 times before. Said it was simple, really. He used to have a house, a business, a wife. Thought he had a life that was solid, unshakable. But his wife had other plans. She cheated. Worse, she cheated with a lawyer. And when it all came crashing down, she took him for everything. Half the business, the house, everything he had worked for. He tried to start over, but bad decisions piled up, one on top of the other, until he was here. Homeless. Forgotten. Just another face on the street people ignored. Almost a year now, he said. I told him I knew the feeling, that I'd been kicked out too, that I was trying to survive, trying to make something of myself. Told him I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. That's when I noticed the wind picking up. The temperature was dropping fast, and it was going to be a brutal night. I told him he could crash at my place if he wanted, get a shower, warm up, sleep somewhere that wasn't a park bench. He hesitated, said he didn't want to be a burden. I told him it was fine. He gave me a long look, then nodded, said I had a good heart, that it was rare these days, said most people just wanted him gone. I didn't say anything, just stood up and started walking. And after a moment, he followed. The walk back to the motel was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't uncomfortable. Just there. Robert didn't say much, and I didn't push. I figured he had enough on his mind already. When we got inside, I tossed him a towel and pointed to the bathroom. He nodded, disappearing inside without a word. The shower sputtered to life a second later, and I heard the pipes groan in protest. This place wasn't exactly the Ritz, but at least the water was hot. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the peeling wallpaper and the musty smell of old carpet. The motel remote was sitting on the nightstand, sticky with something I didn't want to think about. The TV was already on, playing one of those late-night infomercials selling knives that could cut through a brick. Robert took his time in the shower, and I didn't blame him. If I had spent months or years out on the street, I'd probably want to stand under hot water until my skin pruned too. When he finally stepped out, steam billowed around him, and for the first time, I actually got a good look at him. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't some old man who had spent decades on the street. He looked maybe 45, tops, without the tangled mess of hair and beard. He could have passed for someone's overworked office coworker. The kind of guy who grumbled about his fantasy football league and had a world's okayest dad mug on his desk. He had borrowed one of my extra shirts, which was a little big on him, but was better than what he had before. He ran a hand over his now clean face and let out a sigh, like he wasn't even used to feeling normal anymore. Man, I forgot what being clean felt like, he muttered, stretching his arms. I gestured toward the gas station food I had grabbed earlier. It wasn't much, some sandwiches, a couple bags of chips and sodas, but it was better than nothing. Robert sat down across from me, grabbed a sandwich, and took a bite like he hadn't eaten in days. We ate in silence for a bit before he finally spoke. Asked me what I was into, what I did for fun. I shrugged and told him the truth. Computers, tech, stuff like that. I had been messing around with crypto for a while, just small trades, nothing crazy. Managed to make a couple $100 playing the dips. It wasn't much, but it was something. That got his attention. He perked up, sandwich halfway to his mouth. Said he used to be into crypto too. Not just casually, either. He actually followed the trends, bought into new coins early, did his research. Nothing big. $50 here, $100 there, but he liked the idea of it. Liked the possibility that one of those tiny investments could turn into something huge. Then his face changed. He got quiet, staring down at his hands like he was remembering something. He said that when his wife left him, when she took everything and he had to move out, he was so wrecked that he left his laptop behind. The one with all his crypto wallets, his keys, everything. At the time, he didn't care. It was just another thing lost in the mess of his life, falling apart. I raised an eyebrow. Wait, you still have access to that? He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. No idea. Haven't thought about it in forever. Dude. I sat forward. Some of those early investments could be worth something now. Liked a lot. Robert exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's just gone. That laptop was probably sitting in a pawn shop or a landfill somewhere by now. I grabbed my soda and took a sip, thinking, but what if it's not? That's when I saw it. For the first time since I had met him, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't exhaustion. Hope. I leaned back against the headboard, still processing what Robert had just told me. If there was even a chance that his old crypto investments were still sitting in that laptop, it could be worth something. Maybe even a lot. But there was one problem, getting to it. I asked him why he hadn't tried to go back and grab it. If it was still in that house, wouldn't it be as simple as knocking on the door, playing it cool, and asking for his old stuff? Robert let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. He said it wasn't that easy. His ex-wife's new husband was a lawyer, the kind of guy who smelled trouble a mile away. If Robert suddenly showed up asking about a laptop he left behind, the guy would know something was up, and once he realized that there was money involved, he wouldn't just hand it over. He'd make sure it disappeared forever. We needed a plan. Robert tapped his fingers against a motel table, thinking. He said if I helped him get the laptop, whatever was in it, we'd split 50-50. No arguments. That got my attention. I was already invested in this, but hearing that made it feel real. If that laptop held anything of value, this could change both of our lives. I told him I was in. Now we just need to figure out how to get into that house without raising alarms. Robert said the laptop was probably in the basement. When he left, he barely took anything with him, and the house was big enough that his ex probably shoved whatever was left of his stuff down there. No one ever checks the basement unless they have to. That's when it hit me. If we wanted an excuse to get into the basement, we needed a reason, something urgent, something no one would question. I grinned. All women hate rats. Robert squinted at me. I told him we'd make it look like there was a rat problem. If his ex thought there were rodents running around, she'd want them gone ASAP. And what better way to handle a rodent problem than calling in professionals? His eyes widened as he caught on. We'd fake a pest control service, show up looking official, and get access to the basement without anyone questioning it. Robert leaned forward, intrigued but skeptical. He said we'd need actual rats to sell the story. I shrugged and told him that was his department. He'd spent the last year on the streets. If anyone knew where to find rats, it was him. Robert smirked, nodding. Said he knew just the places to find a couple of willing volunteers. Meanwhile, I'd handle the other part. We needed fake business cards, flyers, something to make us look legit. If we showed up without any credentials, the plan would fall apart in seconds. We sat there, letting the plan sink in. It was ridiculous, completely insane, but it might just work. Robert cracked his knuckles, said he'd handle the rats by morning. I told him I'd get the fake flyers ready. This was happening. Morning came fast. Too fast. I barely got any sleep, my mind running in circles over everything that could go wrong. Breaking into a house was one thing, but breaking in while pretending to be a legitimate business? That took a special kind of crazy. Robert was already up, stretching like he hadn't slept on a motel floor the night before. He looked more energized than I'd ever seen him. Guess the possibility of a payday does that to a man. He said he was heading out to get the stars of the show. I told him to be careful. I didn't need to ask where he was going. He had been on the streets long enough to know exactly where to find what we needed. While he was off on his little rat-hunting adventure, I got to work. First stop, the thrift store. I needed uniforms. Something that looked legit, but wouldn't break the bank. After digging through a bunch of ugly polos and old bowling league shirts, I finally found 2 matching beige work coveralls. They weren't perfect, but they looked close enough to what pest control guys wore. A couple of cheap iron-on patches from a craft store, and boom, we had our official uniforms. I even found an old tool belt and stuffed it with random things like a flashlight, duct tape, and a screwdriver, just to sell the look. Next, I had to make the flyers. I found a real pest control company online and copied the general design, swapping out their logo for a generic one I threw together on my laptop. It looked real enough, had a cheesy slogan, a fake website, and most importantly, a phone number I had set up just for this job. If anyone called, it would go straight to voicemail with a generic, "Thank you for calling Safe Home Pest Control" message. I printed a bunch of copies at a self-serve print shop and made sure they looked slightly worn, too crisp, and it'd be obvious they were fake. I even crumpled a few for good measure. Authenticity, baby. By the time I got back to the motel, Robert was already there, holding a plastic container with air holes punched in the top. He grinned like he had just pulled off a bank heist. Got M. Meet our new co-workers. I hesitated before taking the box. Inside, 2 young rats scurried around, clearly unhappy with their current situation. They were small, probably not even full-grown yet. The kind of rats that would send anyone running at first sight. I grabbed a piece of bread and tossed it inside, watching as they huddled in a corner, nibbling cautiously. Robert leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So, what's next?" I smirked. "Now we deliver the package to the customer." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Feels like we're in one of those spy movies." The drive to Robert's old house was quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, more like the kind you get when someone's lost in their own head. He kept staring out the window, his fingers drumming against his knee. I didn't say anything. What could I say? "Hey, man, bet it sucks seeing your old life still go without you." Yeah, not exactly helpful. He finally spoke, voice low. He used to come here a lot, just to look, not in a creepy way, more like a ghost haunting the place where he used to be alive. He'd watch from a distance, seeing his old life go on without him. His ex-wife and her new husband had a routine. Almost every night, like clockwork, they left the house for a couple of hours. Maybe a fancy dinner, maybe a gym session, maybe just getting out of the house. So they didn't have to stare at each other. Didn't matter. What mattered was that the house was empty. And tonight, we were going to take advantage of that. We parked a block away, just in case. No need to make it obvious. The street was quiet, the kind of suburban neighborhood where people peek through their blinds if they see something weird. A guy watering his lawn gave our car a passing glance, but nothing more. Just another evening in safe, quiet suburbia. We waited, watching the house. Then, right on time, the front door opened. Robert's ex-wife stepped out first, dressed up like she was headed somewhere expensive. The kind of outfit that said, "Yeah, we're ordering the bottle of wine, not just a glass." Her new husband followed, checking his phone, barely paying attention as he locked up. They got into their car and drove off. Robert let out a slow breath. Showtime. We slipped out of the car and walked toward the house like we belonged there. Just 2 guys on an evening stroll. Nothing to see here. I half expected a neighbor to pop out and ask what we were up to, but no one did. Probably all too busy inside, watching TV or doom scrolling on their phones. The basement window was small, near the foundation, one of those old-style ones that barely let in any light. Robert knelt down, running his fingers along the edge. He muttered that the latch never really held properly. He had always meant to fix it, never got around to it. Now, it was working in our favor. He pressed against it, and with a little effort, the window popped open just enough. I pulled on the thick gloves I had bought earlier. No way was I handling live rats barehanded. I grabbed the first one. It squirmed, but it was young, not strong enough to do any real damage. "All right, little buddy," I whispered. "Go forth and create chaos." I dropped it through the gap. It landed with a soft thump. The second one went in just as easily. Robert shut the window just enough, so it wouldn't be obvious it had been tampered with. We didn't need someone noticing and deciding to check inside before the plan even got started. Next, I slid one of our fake pest control flyers under the door. Another one went into the mailbox, just in case. Robert stepped back, looking at the house one last time. He didn't say anything, but I could tell this was messing with him. It wasn't just some random house. This had been his home, his life. Now, he was standing outside it like a stranger. I nudged his arm. "You good?" He blinked, like I had snapped him out of something. "Yeah, just weird being back." "I get it. But hey, silver lining. You might walk away from this with a fat stack of cash. That's got to make it feel a little better." He let out a quiet chuckle. "Yeah, I guess." We didn't stick around. We walked back to the car, got in, and drove off. No lights turned on. No alarms went off. Everything had gone exactly the way we planned. Now, all we had to do was wait. The wait wasn't long. 2 days later, my phone rang, and I knew before I even answered that it was time. The number was unfamiliar, but the second I picked up, a frantic voice nearly blew out my eardrum. Robert's ex-wife. She was yelling, barely making sense. Something about how she saw rats in the basement, how her husband was out of town, and how she needed someone to come ASAP before she burned the whole house down. I put on my best professional voice and told her not to worry. Safe Home Pest Control was on the way. 30 minutes. That's what I told her. Just enough time for Robert and me to get dressed, grab our gear, and mentally prepare for this ridiculous stunt to actually work. We suited up in our cheap pest control uniforms. The beige coveralls were slightly baggy, but they did the trick. Robert pulled on a face mask, just in case. He wasn't taking any chances with being recognized. Backpacks? Check. Empty rat cage for captured rodents? Check. We drove over, parked just down the street, and took one last deep breath before heading up the driveway. I rang the doorbell, and a second later, the door swung open. She was a mess. Hair tied up like she hadn't even bothered to look at a mirror, pacing in the doorway like she was ready to bolt. "Oh, thank God you're here," she exhaled. "It's disgusting. I saw them running. In my house. My husband is out of town, and I can't. Please, just get rid of them." Robert and I exchanged a look. "Perfect." I gave her a reassuring nod. "Don't worry, ma'am. We've handled plenty of cases like this. We'll take care of everything." I was laying on thick, but she didn't care. She just pointed toward the basement door and stepped away like it was cursed. I'm not going down there," she shuddered. "You two go." Exactly what we needed. Robert and I stepped inside, and she shut the door behind us. We wasted no time heading straight for the basement, careful not to look too eager. The basement was dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture and storage bins. The air was musty, like no one really spent time down here. Robert scanned the room, his eyes darting around like he was mentally cataloging every inch of the place. Then he stopped. He turned to me, eyes wide. "It should be over there." He moved fast, pushing past some stacked boxes and kneeling beside an old desk. His hands fumbled around the edges before he reached under it, and there it was. The laptop, dusty, slightly banged up, but still intact. He swallowed hard, his fingers gripping it tight, like it might disappear if he let go. I clapped him on the shoulder. "Bag it." He wasted no time stuffing it into my backpack. Now, all we had to do was actually catch a rat and get out of there. The first one was easy. I spotted it scurrying across the floor, grabbed the cage, and managed to get inside without much trouble. The second one, though, nowhere to be found. I gave Robert a look. Man, we need at least one more, or this is going to look suspicious. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his mask. We can't stay down here too long. I nodded, then took out my phone and set a random timer. 5 seconds later, it buzzed loudly. I let out an exaggerated sigh. Damn. Looks like we couldn't catch them all, but at least we got one. We'll need to set traps to get the rest. Robert caught on quick. Yeah, those tricky little guys always leave one or two behind. We climbed back upstairs, making a show of holding up the cage. She recoiled at the sight of the rat, covering her mouth. I put on my most serious face. This one was easy, but you've definitely got more. We'll need to set traps and monitor the situation. She nodded furiously, barely paying attention as she dug into her purse. How much do I owe you? I named a number that sounded just high enough to be legit, but not suspicious. She shoved the cash into my hand, so fast you'd think it was on fire. We didn't stick around to chat. The second we were back in the car, I exhaled hard, gripping the steering wheel. Robert unzipped the bag just a little, staring at the laptop inside. We did it. Now, we just had to see if it was worth anything. Back at the motel, we didn't waste a second. Robert placed the laptop on the wobbly desk, flipping it open like it held the secrets to the universe. The only problem? The thing was dead. He groaned, rubbing his forehead. Of course. I reached into my bag, pulling out my own charger. Relax, I got this. While we waited for the laptop to charge, Robert paced the room. I could tell he was trying not to get his hopes up too much. The guy had been burned enough times to know that life didn't exactly hand out happy endings. You ever think about what you'd do if you suddenly got money? I asked, mostly to distract him. He snorted. A meal that isn't from a gas station would be nice. Dream big, man. He shrugged. I don't know. I used to think about stuff like that. Maybe get a place. Something small. Nothing fancy. Just somewhere with a door that locks and a bed that isn't someone else's trash. I nodded. That was fair. For me, money meant options. Maybe a better car. Maybe getting out of this dead-end cycle. But for Robert, money meant something way simpler. Stability. The laptop finally powered up, the old operating system booting with a slow, almost painful hum. Robert sat down, cracking his knuckles like he was about to arm wrestle fate itself. He typed in his password, and just like that, we were in. First stop, his crypto wallet. The login screen looked outdated, but it worked. A few 10 seconds passed before the balance popped up. $2,500. We stared at it, then at each other. It wasn't life-changing money, but considering Robert had been living off scraps for a year, it was a solid win. Robert leaned back, exhaling. Well, it's something. I grinned. Not bad for a couple of guys running a fake pest control gig. Robert clicked around, going through old folders. One of them caught my eye, labeled sh* coins. I pointed at the screen. What's in there? Robert chuckled. Oh, that's just a graveyard. I used to throw $50 at random new coins, hoping one would take off. Most of them went to zero. Curiosity got the best of me. Open it. He did. Inside, there were multiple wallets, each tied to random altcoins I barely recognized. We checked a few. $3 here, $7 there. Nothing exciting. Then we saw it. A wallet labeled SHIB. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't deep into crypto, but even I knew about SHIB, the meme coin that had skyrocketed in value, turning nobodies into millionaires overnight. Robert frowned. I kind of remember this one. Bought some early, but I have no idea if I ever sold it. My heart pounded. Dude, that thing blew up like crazy. We need to check this now. He hesitated, then clicked on the wallet. The screen loaded for what felt like an eternity. While we waited, my mind raced. SHIB had gone up something insane, like 150,000 times its original value. People who had bought early, really early, had turned a few bucks into millions. The chances of Robert having a decent amount were slim, but if he had held on to even a fraction of what he bought. Robert's knee bounced under the table. "This thing always took forever to load," he muttered. I clenched my fists, willing the screen to move faster. Every second felt like an hour, and then we saw the number. Robert's face went pale. My jaw dropped. Neither of us could speak. We just stared at the screen, our minds struggling to process what we were seeing. I refreshed the page just to be sure. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the numbers were wrong. But no matter how many times I hit that little reload icon, the number stayed the same. $14 million. $14 million. Robert had thrown $100 into SHIB when it was worth fractions of a cent. And while he was out on the streets, that little meme coin had exploded in value, climbing 150,000 times over. We stared at the screen in complete silence. My brain refused to process what I was looking at. It felt like some kind of joke, like we had somehow hacked into someone else's account. But there it was, his wallet, his balance, his accidental fortune. Robert finally exhaled, rubbing his face like he was trying to wake himself up. This can't be real. I clicked into the transaction history, scrolling through old purchases. The numbers all lined up. We even checked live prices on major exchanges. Everything was legit. And the craziest part? If Robert had access to this money months ago, he probably would have sold way too early. I laughed, shaking my head. Dude, if you hadn't lost this laptop, you would have never held on to this. The second you saw a couple grand, you would have cashed out. He blinked, staring at the screen like it had betrayed him. You're probably right. I leaned back, letting that sink in. So, basically getting screwed over was the best thing that ever happened to you. Robert let out a breathless laugh. That's so messed up. I grinned, stretching my arms. Life's funny like that. 1 minute you're getting kicked out of your own house. The next you're a crypto millionaire. Pretty standard American dream stuff. Robert shook his head, still in disbelief. I was sleeping on cardboard a month ago. Now I can buy a real house. I glanced around the cheap motel room, the flickering fluorescent light buzzing in the background. Maybe start with a better hotel first. We sat there, absorbing the sheer absurdity of it all. A year ago, this guy had been sleeping on a park bench, thinking his life was over. Now, he was worth more than most people could dream of. Of course, having money and actually getting the money were two very different things. We needed to move it, secure it, make sure this wasn't just some cruel joke the universe was playing on us. Robert nodded slowly, snapping out of his daze. All right, let's split this up. We created new wallets, carefully distributing the funds across multiple accounts. We wrote down every key, every password, backing it up in multiple places. Paranoia was the name of the game now. When you're dealing with life-changing money, you don't take chances. True to his word, Robert transferred half to me. Just like that, I was holding over $7 million in crypto. We sat back, staring at each other, barely able to process what had just happened. Life was never going to be the same. A few days passed, and the initial shock of the money started to settle into something real. Robert, and I knew we had to be smart. This wasn't the kind of cash you just let sit in one place, hoping for the best. We sold a small portion, just enough to get started, carefully moving the funds across a couple of different exchanges. Neither of us wanted to raise red flags or have some government agency breathing down our necks. Within a week, we had more than enough sitting in our accounts to start fresh. First step, getting out of town. We packed our bags and hit the road, driving across state lines like two guys escaping a past life. It wasn't that we were running from anything, but why stay in the same place where we had been nobodies? It was time for a clean slate. After hours on the road, fueled by bad gas station coffee and enough fast food to shorten our lifespans by a few years, we arrived in a new city, one with opportunity, good neighborhoods, and most importantly, a chance to start over. We each bought a house, not mansions, but solid homes in nice neighborhoods, not far from each other. After years of struggling, Robert finally had a place of his own, something no one could take from him. And me, I had more than just a house. I had control over my life for the first time ever. No more begging for scraps. No more feeling like an afterthought. Of course, we celebrated. A new beginning deserved a toast. Nothing too crazy, just a small dinner at a steakhouse, sitting in a booth where, for once, we weren't checking our bank accounts before ordering. Money changes things, but not always in the way you'd expect. Sure, we splurge a little, a few nice things here and there, but we weren't stupid. The real move was setting up something that would last. We started a business together, nothing flashy, just a solid company that, over time, began making real money. We learned fast. Managing money was a whole new world. Investing, taxes, making sure we didn't blow through it like lottery winners who go broke in a year. We got financial advisors, met with lawyers, set things up properly. Because when life hands you an opportunity like this, you don't mess it up. The funny thing, after everything, Robert ended up finding love. A woman who didn't care about his past, who saw him for who he was now. They got married in a small, simple ceremony, and I stood right there beside him. I met someone too. Someone who made life feel complete in a way I didn't know was possible. Before I had been so focused on just surviving, I never thought about what it meant to really live. We traveled, experienced things we never thought we'd have the chance to. Robert finally got to see the ocean for the first time in his life. I took flying lessons just because I could. We gave back too, donating, helping people who were in the same position we had been in not so long ago. But we wanted to do more than just write checks. We knew firsthand what it was like to have nothing, to feel like the world had turned its back on us. So we decided to create something lasting. We opened a social organization for people who had been broken by life, those who had lost their homes, their families, or just their way. A place where anyone could get a warm meal, a bed for the night, and someone to talk to. We brought in counselors to help with mental health, social workers to guide them toward opportunities, and volunteers who actually cared. No judgment, no red tape, just a place to get back on your feet. It started small, just a rented building with a few beds and a kitchen, but it grew. Word spread, and soon we had the support we needed to expand. It became more than just a shelter. It became a community, a second chance, the same way life had given us one. We built families, not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose, the kind that actually cares about you. As for my old family, they never reached out, not once. And honestly, that was fine. I had spent years trying to earn their love, trying to be seen. But now I didn't need them. I had people who actually valued me. One evening, we all sat together at a picnic, our families laughing, the sun setting behind us. The smell of burgers on a grill filled the air. Kids ran around with sticky hands from melted ice cream. And for the first time in my life, I felt at peace. I leaned back, watching it all, realizing something I wished I had known years ago. Life isn't about who hurts you. It's about who shows up for you. It's about refusing to give up, even when the world tells you to. And most importantly, it's about giving back. Because sometimes when you do good for others, the universe finds a way to give it right back to you. Robert and I started as two guys with nothing. Now, we had everything we ever needed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back.